Sirenys Pierce, welcome to So Money.
Thank you so much for having me. Super excited to be here.
Yes, yes. Our mutual friend Janice Torres introduced us, Yo Quiero Dinero podcast host. Shout out to Janice. She knows the best people. And she said, you got to speak to Sirenys because she has an interesting kind of, in the world of personal finance, as for as long as I have been reporting on it, it's not often that you come across like a different way of thinking or a nuanced concept. And Sirenys, you've come up with what's called the high five banking method. This is also a book now. It's become so popular. I want to get into that, of course, and learn what this is and share that with our audience. But first, as always, we want to know more about you and what drew you to this world of personal finance. Your website's called thepoisedlifestyle.com. I love that, combining money with some flair, some poise. Tell me, everyone's got a personal story. What's your personal story?
Yes, my relationship with money realistically started in 2008. You know how they say you're supposed to learn about money at home? I started learning about money while I was losing my home. My
Oh,
parents are immigrants from Dominican Republic, and they honestly they worked their buns off. They accomplished their version of their American dream. They bought a nice house, a nice car. They were able to travel back home to Dominican Republic as they pleased, help their family, and it was amazing when the economy was good. But every single time the economy dipped, we felt it.
mm.
And in 2008, my dad finally sat my sister and I in the front living room, the one that no one ever sits in, and told us very bluntly, we are broke. Don't ask us for lunch money. Don't ask us for money for clothes, vacations, nothing. If the sheriffs come knocking on the door, I want you to know that they're here to kick us out. If a towing truck comes around, they're not here to help you fix a tire. They're here to take the car. We're
Wow.
not making any of the payments, so we really don't have the money. And at this moment, for me, my sister and I, my parents, they raised us on reading a lot of financial books like The Rich Dad Poor Dad, The Richest Man in
Huh.
Babylon, Who Moved My Cheese. And they were very ambitious, and they always told us to manifest what we wanted. We used to cut out pictures from real estate magazines of the house that we wanted because my dad was in real estate. And it was all, very positive. But this was the first conversation that it wasn't so positive.
Mm.
And I started building a relationship with my money based on fear and
Uh-huh.
anxiety. I started hoarding money like a crazy person. My friends were even like, okay, you're being a little too tight with money. I was trying to save up. I was working, going to school part time at Southwestern Community College and just trying to make ends meet because it was such a tough time. And it wasn't until we finally lost our home when the sheriffs came, kicked my mom out in her pajamas, and the only reason they let her back in the house was because my youngest sister is special needs and she had to go get her and her medication, all of that. And they told her, if you or anyone goes back in the house for any reason, we will arrest you. No questions asked. So, of course, Noosh, I felt like a criminal breaking into my house that night just to get some of my bare essentials. My school uniform, my uniform for work, my school books, my toothbrush, because I knew I was never going to be sleeping in that home again.
Oh my gosh.
And before I left that home, I remember my mom always telling me to take pictures of the house. You never know. And I never knew why she told me that because she
Yeah.
always decorated it very nice. And I took one good look at that home and I was like, wow, I'm done.
Wow.
I can't deal with this shit no more. I
Yeah.
can't live like this anymore. Living in complete fear, seeing a police officer thinking they're going to come kick us out, seeing a tow truck, and thinking they're not here to help me. They're here to take the car. And all of that fear that was just built up in my body just released. And I told
Wow.
myself, I cannot do this. I see how my sister took it, how my parents took this situation. And it wasn't just our household. In my neighborhood, lots of people were losing their homes. Lots of people were losing their jobs, and eventually my parents even ended up divorcing. So I lost more than just a home and a car. Forget that. Losing your family unit is a huge deal.
Wow.
And seeing how deep and how big a recession can impact you, your
Mhm.
actual life on a day to day basis, that's what woke me up and it changed my life. And I realized, you know what? I got to figure out this money stuff because no one's going to come here to save me.
Mhm.
So, and I started realizing that I was living my entire life based on fear. I
Mhm.
picked my first major in college, not because I was passionate, I loved it. I picked pharmacy because I wanted a recession proof career. I
Mhm,
wanted
mhm.
to know that I was gonna come out of college making money and I could take care of myself. And I realized, man, I'm making a lot of choices. My decision matrix was very narrow, very focused on there's only one way to get out of this. When there's so many ways, to survive difficult times. It's not just, breaking into your home. There's other solutions.
Yeah. I mean,
So I
there's some
decided,
sorry,
no,
sorry, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry.
Please
No, so
continue.
I decided to change degrees from pharmacy to business. And eventually I found finance and financial planning. And to me, it felt like the aha moment. There's strategies, there's systems, there's way to protect yourself. You start learning about budgeting, paying off debt, estate planning, tax planning, protection planning, all of the little things that no one in my community knew. And ever since then, I completely fell in love with personal finances and wanting to help my community, my friends, my family, make sure that we can take care of ourselves no matter what's going on.
Wow, what a story. Oh my gosh. Well, and as you were sharing that, I couldn't help but think about, like you said, so many millions of households impacted in a similar way. Houses being
Mhm.
foreclosed on, sheriffs knocking on the door, the liens put on the homes. And I mean, this was not just a recession, this was a housing crisis, 2008,
Mhm.
2009. So you have this sort of, I guess, quote unquote, rock bottom moment. I mean, what's worse than being forced out of your home? First of all, why they gotta do it in the middle of the night? Like, can we have some like decency, Like, so that's another thing. But what was the first thing you did? It sounds to me like there were many steps, right? You kind of reconciled with your fears. You started to read more about personal finance. You switched your major. But, like, what was kind of the first decision that you made to yourself in that moment that allowed you to start to rebuild and rebuild and rebuild and rebuild?
To me, it was hitting that I'm done moment and realizing that I don't have to continue down this path. When I saw myself breaking into my own home and knowing that, the consequences behind that, that's not me. Like point blank, that's not who I am. My decision matrix was completely screwed up. I was in survival mode and I was had a scarcity mindset and none of that was apparent to me. I think that's the scary part when, you're making decisions in your life and you're thinking, "Oh, this is the best decision for me." And
Hmm.
then something happens this dramatically and you realize I'm not making good choices. I'm not
Hmm.
making the best decisions for myself and where I actually want to go. I was in community college at that time and a lot of my friends, they all got out of community college, they dropped out and the amount of people who were transferring were very low, and I knew all the odds were stacked against me. So, around this time, I also got a full-time job, and I went to college full-time. I had to figure out how to get out of this situation into a four-year university so that I can, take care of myself realistically. This is how I saw it. This
Yeah.
is my opportunity to take care of myself. If I don't do this, who's gonna take care of me? My parents can't right now.
I mean, we want everyone to have this mindset, and yet not everyone can or does or chooses to. And you said, you had a sister, you had parents. Like, were you kind of alone in this laser focusedness to rebuild? And if you were, what do you think it is about your personality, your makeup, your DNA or whatever it is, like a lot of people might, there are behavioral biases that happen when there's something like, for example, a home foreclosure, there's a distrust of the system and people
Mhm.
have a hard time moving on and reinvesting in their financial lives for that fear. But what was the voice in your head that differentiated what your journey would look like versus somebody else who would have just stayed stuck?
I think I started seeing myself as the older sister. In the Latina community, we're the backbone of the family. And seeing myself in that home with my sister breaking in and doing that, I felt responsible. And
Mm.
even when I went and transferred to Cal State Northridge, I took her with me. She was there with me for a year in the Valley in LA. And I felt responsible. I mean, I need to make a good impression for not just her, but our friends and our family to let them know that there is hope. We can do this, but we have to stick together. And being the eldest daughter, I had to have tough conversations with my parents about money. And,
Yeah.
sometimes they're like, no, we know best. We're the
Mhm,
adults.
mhm.
But as you're learning about finances, especially for me when I was in my personal finance classes with about investing and retirement, all these things, you couldn't shut me up, to be honest with you. And my boyfriend at the time, which is now my husband, he was like, "You know what? I'm open. Tell me all this stuff," because his family also struggled a lot during the '08 recession. His dad lost his job and his confidence, and he can see that. And he was also very driven and motivated to make a name for himself and get out there. He moved from Alabama to California, which is a really big jump in his community. And he was excited and driven. And I was too. So I was looking for my own tribe. I had another friend that went to USC, and, I would hang out with him and try to get involved with people who were trying to push forward and not feel stuck. And
Mhm.
sometimes, really, that community really does matter. Who you hang around with, what you're reading, what you're seeing on social media or on YouTube, on TV, it does make an impact. So you really want to make sure that you're nourishing yourself and not positioning yourself back in the old environments that weren't letting you grow.
Yeah. Yeah, creating boundaries, really being intentional. What would you say is your favorite part of personal finance, education, or practice? Like for me, I like earning more than budgeting. I like conversations about investing more than saving. And I think that's not everybody. I think everybody has like kind of like their own
Mhm.
um, kind of interests within personal finance. Where do you think you love to hang out and play most?
Don't know why, but I really am intrigued with asset allocations. I don't know if
Oh,
it's just a fancy word. It just makes everyone say, "Oh, okay, what's that?" But I love not having all your eggs in one basket. Again, because my parents are from Dominican Republic, they're immigrants. Over there, there's a very different mindset. They don't have the stock market. There's really only a few ways to make money. Either you own real estate, you own a business, or you play baseball. That's about it. So, for my parents, he came over here, my dad, and he's like, "Okay,
all attainable,
yeah."
by the way.
All
Pick
attainable,
one,
yes.
pick one.
So he's like, "You know what? I'm gonna do real estate." And because they put so many of their eggs in real estate, they didn't have an emergency fund, they didn't have investments for retirement or even a brokerage account. They didn't really have a lot of second, any plan
Right.
in place. And that's what my parents were arguing about. My mom had one idea, my dad had another. My dad said, "Just sell a house." Well, the market's down. The house isn't gonna get a lot of, cash for that. And that solution no longer worked. And that's
Mhm.
where I started realizing you really do need to have different diversifications when it comes
Yeah.
to your savings, when it comes to your investments, when it comes to even to your retirement plan. When you start talking to people in financial planning, they have a complete different strategy for your Roth IRA, a complete
Oh, yeah.
different strategy for your traditional IRA, your brokerage account, different thing. And I love that because it gives you clarity and it makes you feel like, you know what, there's a plan in place. Even if we are not at 100%, we're at least at 90%, and we're going to get there and we're going to make it through. But when you have all your eggs in one basket, that's very tough place to be in. So that's
Mhm.
probably why I'm so intrigued with asset allocations and different, accounts for the different purposes. And I think it
Mhm.
does have a play in why how I created the high five banking method as well.
Well, good segue. Yeah, that's perfect. Let's talk about the high five banking method, where you teach people how to basically organize their finances with purpose. And I believe the breakdown is two checking accounts, three savings accounts. So
Yes.
why do you like this breakdown?
The reason I love this breakdown is because a lot of people look at things in textbooks or online and they hear podcasts or, interviews and like, "Oh, this makes sense." Logically, it makes sense to have different accounts for different purposes. But when you actually go through difficult times, like how I did when the reason that I created the high five banking method was because I found out that my son had an open heart, he needed open heart surgery. He had a heart defect when I was pregnant. And this was such a difficult thing to wrap my mind around. I was 5 months pregnant. And they're asking me, "Hey, do you want to keep the baby or do you
Oh
want
my
to,
God.
keep going?" And all of these difficult decisions I felt that were out of my hands and out of my control. So the main reason why I love the high five thinking method is because it allowed me to take control of the things that I can take control of. When it comes to your health or the future, that's up in the air. But when it comes to your bills or, planning a date night or going to a wedding or buying a home, these are things that you can take control of right now, exactly where you're at.
Mhm.
So the main reason why I love this system is because it allowed me to kind of take my hands off of my finances during the difficult times. When times are good, you can budget, you can make good money, you can go on vacation, everything seems a little easier. But when you're going through difficult times where you don't have the mental capacity to be focusing on are the bills paid? Do we have money to go out to eat? Do we have these things? It alleviates the day to day stress that so many of us are having on our heads. The
Mhm.
mental load, it's too heavy. We need to reduce it and get some margin back into our life.
Yeah.
So when we have a system for our money, we can feel confident that, hey, the responsible the responsible things I have to get done are getting done. If I want to spend a little bit of money for free time, that can be happening. My emergency fund taken care of. My short-term and long-term goals handled. And when you talk to someone that's in the financial planning space, they love the high five banking method because you're secretly budgeting. You're secretly having a protection plan when you have your emergency fund. You're
Mhm.
secretly setting goals for your short term and long term things that you want to accomplish. So there's a lot of financial planning practices in it. And it makes budgeting so much easier, especially if you're someone who doesn't like budgeting, doesn't feel like you have the time for it, or just get overwhelmed with numbers. I know that, some people, they see these large numbers and they're like, "Oh, okay, you went too far."
Right, 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 right. So walk me through it even more crystally. So you can use yourself as an
Yes.
example, or what are we labeling these accounts? What are they for? Is it like one's for debt, one's for? I mean, I have a separate account. I just labeled it the other day. I didn't realize I could even do this at my bank, but for how many years I went, I knew intellectually, like, oh, this is my account for this, but like I hadn't visually cemented it. And then, of course, it's so easy. Like they just have like a little edit emoji, and you just click on it, and you can change the name of that account. And I changed it to, um, what is it? When I have to pay my taxes ahead of time, the
Yes,
quarterly
good.
taxes or
Tax
whatever
account.
it is.
Mhm.
So, I know that's not maybe as specific as you advise, but this whole it speaks to the visualization and the compartmentalization, I think, that you insist upon. But walk me through these 5 different accounts and the practical uses of them.
Yeah, so to keep it simple, the high five banking method is a money management system that's composed of 5 purpose driven bank accounts where you
Mhm.
have 2 checking accounts and 3 savings accounts. So the first checking account is going to be for your bills. This is where you put all your mandatory expenses like housing, transportation, utilities, healthcare, minimum debt payments, and even groceries. All the mandatory things that you need to survive needs to go into this one checking account.
Okay.
Once you have this account filled up, give yourself a thumbs up. You're doing good. After that, the second checking account is going to be specifically for your lifestyle. This is for everything that doesn't go into the bills account. So think of eating out, entertainment, date night, buying clothes for the kids or for yourself. All of the fun things that you want to do on a monthly basis that you want to make sure you're not getting out of hand. Because a lot of times, we'll start putting these on our credit cards, we'll start overspending and going over budget. We want to make sure that we have a cap that you know that you can spend $500, let's say, for example, feel free. You don't have to feel stressed out about that. But I always want to remind people the more pointing you do, the less saving you can do. So if you want to be okay, just make sure you control that lifestyle account. Now, when it comes to the 3 savings accounts, the most important savings account is your emergency fund. Without a doubt, you want to make sure you have a protection plan for you and you have a little bit of a safety net just in case life doesn't go perfect because hey, this is life. Sometimes it comes out of nowhere. So you really want to make sure you have money set aside just in case there's a job loss, there's a recession, there's, a natural disaster. You want to make sure you have what you need to take care of your household.
Uh,
After that is going to be your short-term goals. To me, this is my I'm not going back into debt account. This is the account that you can utilize to save for vacations, to save for annual memberships, for some of the fun things, but also some of the boring things that come up in life. These are for goals that take less than a year to save up for, like Christmas. It comes around every single year, the same
yeah.
day. We want to make sure we're saving up for it and it's not catching us off guard. So this is the account where you're going to pinky promise yourself that you're not going to get into debt for any of these expenses. After that, the last one is going to be your long-term goals. These are goals that
Mhm.
take more than a year, but less than 5 years. This could be saving up for a house, a wedding, a sabbatical. You want to make sure that you have this money set aside in a separate account so that you can clearly see that you're getting closer to your goal. And because some of these goals have a high price tag, down payment isn't cheap nowadays, you want to make sure you're giving yourself time. If
Yeah.
it takes you 3 years, that's all right. Takes you 4 years, that's okay. Just stay committed to your long term goals. Once you have all 5 accounts, give yourself a high five.
Oh wow. Okay. And so what are some of the stories you hear from people who are doing this, where they had everything in one pot, and now with the 5, how has it changed their ability to save, their ability to achieve goals? And also, like, where does the investing go? Is that I assume this is all after your paycheck, so maybe you have a 401k at work, you're already contributing to that, but if you're doing it on your own, is that coming out of your necessities, you think?
Yes. So the first is the people who are doing the hi-fi banking method. What I've noticed with a lot of couples specifically is that they're communicating a lot more about their finances.
Yeah,
Everything was very separate. This person handles this person handles that. And it brings a lot more openness and communication when it comes to the finances. I've also seen a lot of people share that they're accomplishing a lot more goals than they were previously. That I have a friend that she bought her home and now they're saving up to buy a rental property and that they're seeing the forward momentum and it makes them excited together to be like, hey, we're both combining our finances to get towards this goal and we're getting to it quicker. So it brings a level of excitement and joy. And again, especially when it comes to the emergency fund, a lot of couples, they want to make sure that they're taking care of themselves, but this is for both people and for your kids, especially, life gets very hectic when you have a family. So you really want to make sure that you have that savings and that both partners can actually access it. Because if something
mhm,
happens to one partner, they get in a car accident or God forbid something happens, the other partner can be there, be like, hey, I got the medical bill. I'll make sure the bills are getting paid. And it gives that transparency that a lot of couples are needing when it comes to their finances on a day to day basis. And I'm really excited about it. I've been using it for years at this point. And, even from my own marriage, we do all hands meetings where we talk about our finances and we both make sure that we're keeping up the accounts and maintaining them so that they're, very clear and transparent for both of us to understand. The whole
mhm,
point is for it to be easy. It's not for it
yeah,
to be difficult for you to see how much money you can spend. Can you go out to eat? For both of you to say, hey, can we afford to go out to eat this weekend? Yeah, we can. We have $300. We're good. Let's go.
yeah, yeah,
And to be open in that way. I know communicating about finances in relationships or even with yourself, is a little intimidating for even individuals. So to have that transparency and that clarity is key. Comes to retirement, the main reason why retirement isn't part of the hi-fi banking method is because I want people to not look at retirement as a savings account. I want them to look at it as an investment account. You have to
mhm,
invest the money. You can't save your way to retirement.
right,
And also because some people, like you said, some people have 401ks, 403bs. There's a lot of options on how people can put money away for retirement. If you're someone who doesn't have, a company sponsored retirement plan, you can definitely put money into your bills checking account to transfer into your Fidelity or Vanguard account to, fund your own individual retirement account or Roth IRA as well. So I definitely want people to know that there's a lot of flexibility. This is a framework. It's not meant to be set in stone where you have to have all 5 accounts at the same time. It really builds upon based on where you're at. So if you're someone who, you don't feel like you have the wiggle room to save for retirement, that's okay. Let's make sure that we're nailing down your bills, giving yourself a realistic lifestyle budget. Cause even at my lowest points, I still had a lifestyle. It might be $40, but it was still a lifestyle.
something.
So
Yeah,
we want to make sure that we're being realistic with ourselves. A lot of people are really trying to, maximize their retirement accounts, but then they're ending up in credit card debt and then, falling off their budget because they're not being very honest or transparent with themselves about how much they can push towards retirement. And I
mhm.
want people to have that honest conversation with themselves. And that starts with looking at your bills and looking at your income and seeing how much can you actually, squeeze out to push towards retirement in a realistic way.
Yeah. Oh gosh, one thing that keeps coming up a lot in my conversations with experts and even just neighbors is this fear of like a recession or the reality that life is so expensive. Yes, I
It
get
is.
that I have to save and I have to budget and I got to live within my means, but when you have inflation with where it's at and our wages haven't really caught up to the cost of living, I'm just curious what you're hearing from your audience and what you would say to somebody who's like, I'm doing the high five banking method. I'm working towards having an emergency fund, but it's just like the necessities of life are so expensive. I don't even know where to cut back. What would you say to this person? Is there always room to cut back, or is it maybe time to shift the strategy to a different way of creating breathing room in your budget?
Yes, definitely. I'm very positive that there's multiple ways to solve this problem. For a lot of people, they feel like they're living paycheck to paycheck. This is a situation that we're hearing across the board, all over CNBC, the news, every outlet that you can think of. But when you actually look at the numbers, About 38% of people are living below the poverty line, where they're
Mhm.
getting government assistance, they are low income. The other percentage of people in that gap, they're having a cash flow issue.
Mhm.
So, what I teach in the book, a few different strategies to help you with that cash flow issue. First one would be the cut, keep, and reduce strategy. This is something that I came up with during the pandemic when I realized that my husband and I do not have a game plan of what to do if our
You have a
income
game plan?
abruptly
You have
cuts.
no game plan for for a pandemic?
No, yeah. We had no game plan. We're like, at what point do we cut Netflix? I don't even know.
Yeah, yeah,
You
yeah.
know, everyone's fighting over toilet paper. I don't know what we should be doing. And it gave me flashbacks of '08 when my parents were disagreeing on what moves they should be doing. My mom wanted to do this, my dad wanted to do that. They disagreed. They ended up doing nothing, and we all were suffered because of that. So I really wanted to make sure that my husband and I were on the same game plan. So we actually reviewed all of our bills, and we wanted to do a game plan A, B, and C for the worst case scenarios.
Mhm.
Not just if there's a pandemic or a recession, but also for ourselves so that we know there are strategies, there are game plans that we can actually start executing. At what point do we need to cut or reduce our housing expense? And what options do we actually have? For a lot of people that are renting, they don't even know where their lease agreement's at. There's a lot of information on there. Do you have a 30-day net where you have to let them know that you're going to leave, or a 60-day? How hard is it to get a roommate? Is that
Right.
opportunity? What steps do you need to know in order to reduce this expense or even cut this expense out of your budget? For a lot of us, when it comes to our cell phone bill, there's a lot of options. We know that. We can switch plans. We can add a family member to make it a family plan, or we can even move to Boost Mobile or Cricket.
Right,
We
right.
know that there's multiple ways to reduce this expense. We don't have to go cold turkey and start cutting everything out of our lives. And the main thing that you really want to focus on, especially when you're doing a cut, keep, and reduce strategy, is how can you extend your emergency fund runway? That is
Mhm.
when you're starting to reduce your expenses, you're giving yourself more wiggle room. That's going to give you the opportunity to have not just a 3-month emergency fund, but you might have a 4-month emergency fund by the time you do a cut, keep, and reduce. And now you're feeling more confident. It's like, oh my goodness, we can get through this. We
Yeah.
have an extra 30 days to make moves. And that can make a huge difference in how traumatic or how successful your family gets through these difficult times.
Mhm.
Another strategy that I talk about in my book is called the 2-week gap strategy. What I realized when I was working full time around 2010 after we lost our home, I started working at a payday loan spot. This is at a point that I had no idea what this was. I had no idea about finances. I was just learning. I was looking to get, a job that was full time that could pay well. And I saw all of these amazing people, super sweet, that were making good money coming in every 2 weeks to get a payday loan. And when I saw the
Mhm.
interest on these payday loans, I was shook. They were in the hundreds. We're thinking credit cards are bad because they're in the
Yeah.
20s and 30s. These interest rates were in the hundreds. It was wild to me. As I kept working there, I realized these people don't have an income problem. They have a cash flow problem. The
Mhm.
timing of their paychecks are off sync with their
Wow.
actual bills. And I came up with a strategy that will help people get at least 2 weeks ahead of their bills by kind of like doing a no spend challenge. Well, they'll pull back, not
Mhm.
because they have to, but because they want to on lifestyle expenses. They'll cut, savings, investing, even if you need to, and all lifestyle expenses. So you can get that 2-week gap,
2
a little
weeks.
bit ahead, at
Yeah.
least 2 weeks ahead
Yeah.
of your bills so that you can have that security and that margin that if anything happens, you at least have some extra money in your bills account to kind of give you that peace of mind. Because
Mhm.
so many people are using buy now, pay later, credit
Mhm.
cards, payday loans right now. And you need to make sure that we have that gap so that we're not positioning ourselves to use these tools in ways that aren't benefiting us.
Yeah.
Because credit cards are great, but if you're, carrying a rolling balance, that interest is pretty hefty and it can
Right,
add
right.
up very quickly. I know a lot of people. Go
Sorry.
ahead.
When you were working at the payday loan site, what was the average amount they were borrowing?
It was about $200 to $250.
Yeah,
So
so
it
to your
wasn't
point,
like
yeah,
yeah, it wasn't like a huge amount, but every single 2 weeks they'll come and pay $300, about $45 to $55 in interest for just 2 weeks to borrow it. And I know it doesn't sound like a lot, but in a month that's $100, for example, or $110 that they're
yeah,
paying back. So they had the money, but if they just maneuvered a little differently, that could be changing the due dates on some of their bills,
right.
negotiating, doing a cut, keep, and reduce, seeing what they can do because There's a lot of people that, get paid twice a month, and then you get a new job, and then you get paid once a month. That's a big shift.
Right, right.
But if you have that 2-week gap, you're at least in a better position where you're not gonna be, getting the back end of these financial tools. And they're there for a reason, and again, buy now, pay later, credit cards, they're very profitable for a reason, and they're here for a reason. They're there for just in case, but we cannot continue relying on them. So if we're positioning ourselves to have, a little bit of wiggle room, that margin, we don't have to be perfect because none of us are perfect. Life's not perfect.
No.
So we need to be grateful to ourselves and be, nice to ourselves. And it's like, you know what? I really do want to go out to dinner with my friends, but I want to be nice to myself and make sure I have that margin so I don't feel stressed out in case, a paycheck doesn't come on time, government shutdown, or, a vendor. You have your own business and they switch. If you're thinking you're going to get paid in 30 days, it's actually 60 days. And you're like, oh no.
Yeah, so have a cushion. I mean, it sounds to me like what you're also encouraging people to do is to be an advocate for yourself, which I don't think many
Hmm.
people default to that personality trait, of with that relationship with their money that like I can be in control. You think, well, the bill's due when it's due, and I'm going to get paid when I get paid, and the cost is the cost. And I think we don't say, wait, what if it wasn't that way? Let me call, let me negotiate. And this is stuff that you have to learn because if you don't see it when you're younger, and my parents, they thought about money a lot, but the one thing that they did teach me was that the first price is like just the negotiation, right? And everything is a negotiation. Really, it is at the end of the day.
Hmm.
Course, better to negotiate early on as opposed to when your like house is in foreclosure. But when you start to feel that financial stress and the pinch, like that is the moment to sort of, or when you anticipate that happening, to go in and have a chat, even not even on the phone. Like you can just, I found success just with chat bots. Like lowering
That
my cell
works.
phone bill on the website while watching Netflix. It's not every day, but that does happen. I mean, we just have to put ourselves in that role and believe that we do have some authority when it comes to these sorts of things. So, now tell me a little bit more about your book and where we can find it, and maybe one piece of financial advice that has recently even changed your life, because we're always
Oh,
learning. I feel like I'm always be getting schooled on personal finance in my own life as well.
yes, definitely. So the book is available everywhere that books are sold, Barnes& and Noble, Amazon, Target, Walmart. I'm super excited that it's out and available for people to actually start reading and enjoying and learning a little bit more about me and how they can implement this strategy into their own personal finances. And when it comes to me, I think it's all about creating systems. Even though I am the systems lady in personal finance at this point, I have a system for my meal plan. I have a system for my household, a system for my finances. There's always ways to make improvements. And for me in my household, it's learning about new topics that you can bring into your all hands meeting. This is something that I also teach in the book where, you don't just look at the last 30 days, you're also looking at the next 30 days on what you can start implementing. And, with all the changes that are happening with the government and the economy and my kids' school, being open to saying, you know what, I forgot this, to bring this up during this meeting and just being honest, like, hey, it flew over my head. And just accepting that you're not always going to be perfect. You're not always going to have all the answers. And I feel like when you do that, it opens up, the conversation to be a little bit more smoother. You're accepting that you're not perfect. And even in my relationship, I'm not perfect. I'll admit that. But, when we're talking about new expenses that are coming up, going over budget or not saving as much, you want to be proactive and honest with yourself and also your partner and your family members, whoever's involved in that family discussion. And don't be embarrassed. Right now, a lot of people feel a lot of shame when it comes to their finances, of learning new things, like you said. You and me, we're both students of personal finance and of
Totally. Stay
life.
curious. Stay curious. It is
Absolutely.
one of my first guests on the show. I asked, "What makes you so money?" And they said, "I continue to stay curious." But what
I
would
love that.
Sirenese, what makes you so money?
I think what makes me so money.
I'm gonna start throwing that
That's
into
a
the
really good, yes,
question.
bring that back, bring
It's an
that
oldie
back.
but a goodie. Yeah.
I think I'm open. I'm
Mhm.
open to learning. I'm open to experiencing new things. There's so many new investments always out there. There's always new ways to save more, high yield savings accounts, money management accounts, and you just you never know everything. I think that's the biggest thing. Even if you consider yourself a financial expert, you're always learning still. And I think a lot of people they feel intimidated to speak to financial experts or to get financial advice because they feel intimidated. And I heard it too many times in the elevators at Merrill Lynch, at Ameriprise. I would hear people saying, I don't know what we're invested in. I
Uh,
don't know what's going on.
yeah.
And a lot of times it's just speak up for yourself, you know? BCC'd on all the emails to the tax people, to your financial advisor. Get involved and don't act like, oh, my partner has it covered. No, you need to have it covered as well. And I feel like being a partner, nowadays for women, they feel like it's not their place to learn about managing the finances.
Yeah.
And I want you to know that it is your place. You are
Yeah.
in the right place. So take pride in that in everything that you do and teach your daughters the same thing because that's what I'm doing with mine. She's reading the high five banking method now. And she's like, I'm
There you
excited. I
go.
can't. She's really high in her reading. So I'm excited for her. She really wants to start like learning about money and investing. And I feel like that's the biggest blessing that you can give to your family. Have them be curious, have them want to learn about money and how to maximize what they have. Everything in life is a blessing. How do you maximize it really shows, your stewardship.
Sirenese Pierce, thank you so much. The high five banking method. Pleasure to meet you. Thank you so much
Yes.
for your storytelling, being so honest and raw. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.